welcome you at the Center for Development Research. I'm happy that you find your way over here from the conference area or from wherever you came from. Today we have a session on ecosystem services and climate change, and we are very happy to have a really nice portfolio of presenters here. We will have a keynote presentation of Thomas Koetz. He's a member of the IPBES secretariat, followed by 4 other presentations, and I will present the presenters when they start talking. So, yeah. Okay, the keynote lecture will be 20 minutes, and we'll have a short question and answer session afterwards, because unfortunately Thomas has to leave after his talk because he's very busy with other activities during the COP, and yeah, but then we will continue with the other speakers and have a small discussion after the 4 other presentations. So, Thomas Koetz, please, you have the floor.
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for giving us IPBES the opportunity to speak, to present our conceptual framework and the work and the approach we have to ecosystem services, and I'm also trying to touch as much as possible on the link to the climate change discussions and debate. Well, I just continue like that. My name is Thomas Koetz. I'm the head of work program in IPBES, which stands for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and which, in short, you may know, is very similar to IPCC, the Work to the Climate Change panel. Is that this one? Yeah, thank you. I've been asked to give a presentation about IPBES, its work program, the conceptual framework, and how that fits, or how we address ecosystem services. And that's what I'm trying to do quickly. The structure of the presentation is as follows. I have a very quick slide about what is IPBES and what we are doing. How IPBES is structured, that I'm really only touching briefly, and then I'm putting a lot more time on the conceptual framework of how we try to undertake our work in the sense of our content and our framing, and then how we can get involved, and as well so what we are doing so far. What is IPBES? The IPBES stands, as I said, Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It is an independent intergovernmental body established by governments in 2012, and by now it has 126 member states. It is very similar to IPCC, so it's an intergovernmental panel. The plenary set together by the government and observer, which includes stakeholders, universities, etc., are discussing and giving us the money to do things. This has been established as a response to requests from governments, and IPBES provides policymakers with objective scientific assessment about state of knowledge regarding the planet's biodiversity. We are also contributing to tools and methodologies to be used to implement such agendas, etc., but I come back to that in a moment. We also asked to provide options for responses based on the best available science. In a nutshell, our mission is defined as to strengthen the science policy interface for biodiversity and ecosystem services for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being, and sustainable development. Lots of catchphrases here, and I'm trying to drill down in the discussion on the conceptual framework what that means on the more intellectual framing things, and I also will present our work program where we have then all our projects for the first 5 years listed. So as I said before, IPBES is to be understood that what we do for biodiversity is what IPCC is doing since many decades already for climate change, with a few additions, because after 30 years of climate change of IPCC work, we have tried to learn and take things a bit further, and I'm explaining that now. So what do we do? We have 4 functions, which is the first 4 points, and then we have an outreach and communication element. And when it comes to the 4 functions, the first one is the classic, is what IPCC does mainly, what it's known for, which is expert assessments, which are a synthesis and critical evaluation of available knowledge of published research or grey literature, and one of the dimensions IPBES has been mandated to also include is indigenous and local communities' knowledge, which is an innovative and quite tricky endeavor, but we are making some headways on that. And that will be subject of another side event presentation I'm giving at 3 o'clock this afternoon in the Bula area. The second function is on policy support, and we have been asked to identify policy-relevant tools and methodologies and facilitate their use and access, and to catalyze where necessary the future development of such tools. And the idea here is that the assessments themselves are just very synthetic products at a state of time of some knowledge of what works, what doesn't work eventually, on a very high level. But there's so much knowledge in there which or behind the scenes as well, which is then very useful for actually practitioners and policymakers in their own context to be following up if they like, for example, the idea of a payment for an environmental services scheme. If I were to implement that in my conditions and my context, what do I need to actually go follow up? That will be very difficult to be reflecting in depth in the 20-page summary for policymaker, and even in the 200 pages reports, which cover so much things. So the idea is to have there a web portal or a work ongoing to drill further into that follow-up of the assessments, to really provide more hands-on advice and guidance how to implement certain schemes or mechanisms. The other part, which is very important to our establishment, is the function on capacity building. It was very clearly pointed out by the plenary that in order to do that right, to the interface between science and policy, we need a level playing field, and we need a very good capacities on all ends, both on the scientific end, so people around the world can produce the scientific and other type of knowledge to the process, and that there is a good representation of various knowledge types. As much as capacity building on the uptake of things, and the policymakers or practitioners end, also contributing to the development of the products, as much as actually the uptake, and really taking that then further into implementation. So that's an important dimension there. Here we are asked to identify, to meeting and to catalyzing priority capacity building needs of IPBES members, experts and stakeholders. Excuse me. The budget we have for that is not extraordinarily large. Our role is in the first place to identify these needs and gaps, and then with a little bit of seed funding, whatever we do, to then really try to catalyze and to get involved with strategic partner organization to do that. And following my presentation, there will be one from the GIZ, from Marina Kosmus, and that's just one example of how we're trying to work with existing initiative to make sure that all these needs are being met, and we sort of synergize with existing work. Then the last of the 4 functions is about knowledge generation and mobilization, and here the function is to identify, mobilize, and where necessary catalyze the generation of policy relevant knowledge and data. Here, to some extent, that includes work on trying to help the work on assessments to with regard to what indicators should we use within our context of the assessment, in terms of sort of modeling experience and data which we need, but also when there is gaps of knowledge we identify, or gaps of data which we identify, which will not be met within the course of an ongoing assessment, which is usually 3-4 years, that we then catalyze and try to engage with the scientific community or with the research funders to pick up what we have, or slash the science policy interface has identified as 3 critical areas of knowledge needs, to then further create and generate that knowledge so that next time around we do an assessment, that knowledge will be there. I'll give you one example. At the moment, we had an assessment on methods, on scenarios and modeling, and out of that, and that was not, it was really about what are the gaps, or what do we have in terms of tools and methods at the moment to undertake scenarios, analysis and modeling exercises within the context of biodiversity and ecosystem services. That has led to also identification of gaps, and that was finalized in the beginning of 2016. And what has happened now is that through follow-up on that work, we have initiated or tried to influence the leveraging of a call from the Belmont Forum, which is mainly provided by the European Union, but also other countries like Brazil and others, to launch a 20 million euro research call on scenarios and models for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I'll come back a bit together at the end on how that relates to some of his ecosystem service and climate change discussion. Finally, we have a communications and outreach package or project where we try to communicate and engage as much as possible the community in our work. This is what we do. I don't expect anybody to read this in detail, just to say that for the first 5 years, so starting with January 14, going all the way to the mid-19, so May 19, we've had a 5-year work program which was structured as such. We had 4 different objectives, 18 different deliverables, and for example here you find the regional assessment we are undertaking at the moment, which is 4 in 4 different regions, the global assessment, you find the thematic assessment on pollination. We have another one on land degradation and restoration and invasive living species. That is to the land degradation one is going to be finished next year, and the 2 other here on invasive living species and reviews are likely to start next year, possibly the year after. We have something on policy support tool in terms of values and models, etc., etc. And we have the 3 task forces up top, which sort of provides the foundations to the work of capacity building on ILK and indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, and then on on the knowledge and data needs. So how is this structured? Very briefly, our decision-making body is the plenary, which meets once a year about. It's the governments, the member states' governments that have the decision mandate and power. Everybody else, even other governments which are not member states, are there as observers. That's same for any other NGO or IGO. That meets once a year. We have, below that, we have a bureau that oversees the administrative functions of IPBES, including budget functions or political planning, etc. And we have a multidisciplinary expert panel, in short, the MEP, which is basically the scientific and technical advisory body. The bureau is 10 people, the MEP is 25 people. And they're nominated directly by the government and selected also by the governments at plenary meetings. And these people then oversee the process of establishing expert groups or task forces, which then are undertaking and implementing concrete activities, such as the global assessment on biodiversity, or the thematic assessment of pollination, or the task force on capacity building. There's a whole ongoing, it's always based on formal calls for nominations and selection procedures, and that's highly regulated. And then at the bottom you have the secretariat, which is based in Bonn, in its core team, which we are 12 people at the moment, and we work similar like the IPCC with technical support units, which are spread around the world. We have 12 of them, altogether having a team of 40. And the technical support units are helping them to implement specific of these projects. Now, that's roughly what we are supposed to do, and sort of the structure that guides that. Now the conceptual framework. The conceptual framework was one of the first substantive products of IPBES and agreed in 2013 in December, together with that first work program, and it gives a little bit the idea, or like a framing of when we undertake an assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services, how do we do that logical framework? What's the world view of IPBES on the issue? Many of these things, at least in elements, are familiar to many other frameworks. You know, the drivers, DPSIR framework is reflected to some extent, etc. There's a number of key elements which are new or different, which I would like to highlight. And that is, on the one hand, on top, this is all about human well-being or the good quality of life. So that was made very clear that that is on the top. And the other thing, very importantly, is that in the center of stuff, in the center of all our considerations, is the human and its activities. It's the institutions and the government that influence indirect or represent indirect drivers, and then have its influence on direct drivers, nature. Nature's contribution to people or ecosystem goods and services, and then back to human well-being. So that's roughly the general idea of how we want to structure our assessments and what we want to follow on. And it's not only the boxes which we look at, it's also the errors, very importantly. How you, for example, ecosystems and the biodiversity of it, influence the functioning, the ecosystem functioning, the productivity, which is the base often of ecosystem services. And how ecosystem services, together with anthropogenic assets, for example roads, market systems, etc., actually then provide an important basis to the human well-being. Now, nature's contributions, the other element, sorry, one step back. The other element which is quite important to mention is, and that is part of the context of the constituency or of the biodiversity debate, we have a very strong discourse about indigenous and local communities. So that's through, and that comes to extend the nature of the issue, which is very much locally based, biodiversity and ecosystem services. There was a very strong urge to somehow reflect the idea that indigenous communities and local communities are reflected within that conceptual framework as well. So what came out of that work, that was an expert group, was that we had that three-tiered classification of our boxes and of our ideas, or the elements of the conceptual framework. The green language is maybe the conventional or scientific approach to things, right? This would be called biodiversity and ecosystems. This would be ecosystem goods and services. Up there would be human well-being. The blue titled is to reflect examples of indigenous and local communities sort of worldviews. So nature would be in that sense, the Mother Earth, the systems of life, or nature's gifts would be somewhat equivalent to ecosystem services. And the concept of human well-being, in their view, would be living in harmony with nature, etc., etc. These are examples. They're not supposed to be taken literally as only being this, but examples. And then the black titles is basically the more generic term which tries to encapsulate both of these, the scientific and the indigenous perspective. So that's the black nature's contribution to people, and that's how we now work. And often that translates, when we talk about ecosystem service, more and more we are talking about nature's contribution to people, which is not to replace ecosystem services, as a concept, which is just to give it a bit broader scope, and I'll explain it a little bit. Right. So, this is what we think, and with that understanding or discussion on nature's contribution to people, one of the things that happened is we took the MA conceptual framework on ecosystem service, and that was developed by an expert group with valuation and value experts and environmental economists, or ecological economists, etc., lots of other people, and it was sort of further developed, all based and it's still equivalent or to the ecosystem services debate. It's not replacing it. We have roughly 3 different categories. We have regulating services, very similar to the Millennium Ecosystem classification. We have then a material service component or category and a non-material. And this is where we somewhat call it differently, but it's still very equivalent to the main concepts. The other thing where we have allowed to be a bit more flexible approach looking at this is that many of these services, for example, and here the material services, for example food, that they breach actually across different categories. So it's the food, for example, is under the MA classification just seen as a provisional service of proteins, etc. But everybody knows that pasta is more than just carbohydrates to the people, but gives identity to, for example, the Italian people. So it has a non-material value, right? So there's a lot of these sort of further thinking of that, broadening and allowing a little bit more what comes in basically relational values. Values we as what the people hold in relation to certain things within nature, which then also allows a little bit to bring into perspective that indigenous and local community perspective, which broadens the pure, sort of very rigid categories of the. So that is sort of coming a little bit from that ecosystem services perspective, but bringing that further, we have now looking for the nature skills. That's the other perspective we try to bring in, which very often think very different, contextual, place-based, not having this divide between nature and humans, or sort of the same, which is often within the scientific community discussion. And basically, we're trying with this concept of nature's contributions to be able to mix a more generalizable and to some extent quantifiable perspective of nature's contributions to people with a more contextual perspective, which is very much qualitative and very different and very vague. And so that is sort of a little bit the idea of what we want to do in our work. Just coming up with that took a couple of years, so our very early work, for example on the pollination, did not reflect these kind of things in detail. Now with the ongoing assessments, in particular the one on the global assessment, which will be finalized only a year from now, we try to take this up a lot more. Because there's quite a lot of implications of what that means to actually undertaking valuations in the context of assessments or in general. The classic is, we have an economic valuation, and that's what what very often is understood as, okay, we do ecosystem service and how that contributes, etc. But there's a lot more to that, and you can do ecological dominated valuations, social dominated valuation, or cultural dominated valuation. These are different layers. And to some extent, the system of ecosystem accounting is trying to take some of these layers already into account. You see that. What we want to try is to actually go to a pluralistic valuation, to a concept where we try to, yes, we look at all these various different components, but we try to bring that together in what we sort of express as a more pluralistic and coherent sort of undertaking. That is very complex and not yet 100% clear of how methodologically that would all be done well. But there is some guidance of what at least to be considering when we do this work. But it's still a long way forward. We very much hope that one of the pending assessments of the first work program is one on the methods, the methodological assessment on valuation, and the diverse conceptualization of values. That's what it's officially called. So really looking not at the numbers or whatever, at the outcome of it, but really at the methods and tools we have at hand to get our head around this, to do that as the method. So we hope that we get started next year, and that would be then a 3 years assessment, and in 3 years from now we would have a better overview of the, of the accepted methods we can use to do that. Now, relevant results so far. Very quickly, the thematic assessment of pollinations, as I said, did not yet look into that very pluralistic view and had a more standard approach to ecosystem service field, and it came up for, I'll just take two different points here from the SVM, from the Summary of Policymakers, said like up to almost 600 billion in annual global food production relies on pollination and on pollinators, like the biodiversity wrong. And the other key message, one of the other key messages, is that climate change is regarded as one of the important factors and drivers contributing to the decline of species, and that any other scenarios or any scenarios around the climate change scenarios world is indicating that there's a further steep increase, also produced by climate change, which often has to do with the climate that changes and the landscape changes more quicker than populations of pollinators can move or disperse. We have then also almost finished the thematic assessment on land degradation and restoration, which will be finished in March 18 in the plenary there, which obviously has very direct links to climate change and the whole land degradation discussion and the way of how we can restore land in order to not only deal with the biodiversity but also with climate change adaptation matters, etc. So that's coming up soon. It has a clear direct view. Also, it wants to produce knowledge or information also with regard to ecosystem services, obviously, and nature's contribution to people. As well, we have 4 regional assessments ongoing. Again, these are broad. They look at all sorts of drivers and issues in the context of biodiversity and ecosystem service, so the whole conceptual framework in all its dimensions. The 4 regions are the Americas, so Latin America and North America. Then we have Asia Pacific, including New Zealand and Australia. We have Europe and Central Asia, including Russia and the Stars. And then we have Africa as the 4 regions. Again, these assessments will be finalized in March. Then ongoing, and that's in the middle of it, we at the moment, and finalized only in May 2019, is the global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And this is really looking at the global picture, drawing on all what we've done so far, including the regional assessments, and trying to really put a good base of the debate and the state of the knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem services for the debate on having achieved or not the IG targets 2020 and all that context there, what happens in 2020, as much as already providing early feedback on how to underpin with knowledge the achievement of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And so much focus there is also on ecosystem service, on the utility of things in the context of the nexus between biodiversity underpinning things like food security or other things, and covered in the SDGs, and as much as possible also in relation to climate change. Already mentioned, I was the methodological work on scenarios and models. There, after a first assessment, which was finished in 2016, we are now working on actually further developing scenarios and models around biodiversity and ecosystem services with the high ambition that one day we will have some similar situation like the IPCC, which has a whole scientific community around it, producing models and scenarios on climate change on a continuous basis. There's no such thing, like only like a very small fraction of something equivalent within the biodiversity community. We are trying now with that sort of work to catalyze that over time we develop something similar. And we're doing this very much in collaboration and integrating IPCC's work, in particular on the shared socioeconomic pathways. So we have common scenarios and common ways of modeling. We use the same data sets and stuff. It's a highly complex work. It's not done overnight, but that's sort of our ambition over the next years as well. And then we have a policy support web portal, which we are working on at the moment, which is there in a beta version, and we will share it with governments to look at. And that is really sort of a web portal where we try to give access to specific tools and instruments for implementation of various things, including related to ecosystem services or others. Evaluation, guidance should be there as well. And one of the examples of the input we would like to see here is also coming from ongoing initiatives outside, and one is the Values project, which Marina, Kosmus and the GIZ will present. So that is it from me. Sorry, how to get involved, just one thing if you're interested. Our website, IPBES.net, you find all these different informations. There's a stakeholder website if you were interested as a stakeholder to join. You can sign up to a platform and you will be receiving information. You can find, once a registered stakeholder, you find a lot more information and access to various other elements of what we produce. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to have another round of questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Thomas Koetz, for this interesting presentation of IPBES and its work program. Before I open the floor, I would like to start with one question. I think we all agree that biodiversity and ecosystem services are also essential elements in the for climate protection, and also in the context of this COP23. I would like to know your perspective on the current perception of the climate community of IPBES and its relevance, and maybe the major challenges you see in that regard.
It's positive to see there's good development, but I think we need to all understand that IPBES itself was only created in 2012. We are happy if the biodiversity constituency knows what we are doing and what we are, so we're making great headway there. At the same time, we do have more and more relation with the climate change community. There's very leading figures that straddle the borders between climate change and biodiversity are part of our work. For example, Guy Midgley from South Africa, who's one of the leading experts in the 1.2 degree special report of the IPCC, or Paul Ledley, that have been also involved in climate change relevant reports. And that's happening. We're working very closely with IPCC to also, in terms of our communication, to reach out more commonly. So there is good starting of this work, but there's much still to be achieved in terms of really getting to know what IPBES is and does, that it is an equal footing or a brother of IPCC in that extent, and that we need to work together a lot more in terms of contributing to that very important debate of what biodiversity and ecosystem services can contribute to our relevance in the context of, for example, climate change adaptation.
Thank you. Other questions? Thomas Koetz. Yes, please.
I wonder, IPCC has their methods, statistic-wise, and you have your method, I assume. How can you really make the various methodologies more comparable, so that at the end what you are really intending to do, and which is important, I think, can speak on one platform, so to speak.
Yes, I think that's an important question, and it's going to be hard work, literally, and it's going to be achieved only by bringing these people together to some extent, and over time making sure that there is compatibility, or at least one knows what that means in which context, etc. And to the extent that new things are generated, that they are from the beginning on generative methods or indicators that they are being brought together. But there, of course, I mean, with 30 years of climate change discussion, and the one benefit in the terms of the climate change communities and the research, the knowledge generation, is almost inherently global. So they have for many years worked as a global network and have their established way of doing things. Biodiversity very often has been done in the backyards of whatever biologist, and everybody has come up with their own method, so it's a lot more tricky to bring that together. On top of you include indigenous and local knowledge, it's a whole different way of understanding the world. So it's not easy, but this is exactly why we are working on streams like looking at modeling and scenarios in a common way together, and trying from the beginning on to bring climate change thoughts into that debate to make that easier and working. The same will hopefully happen on the values, different ways of valuation.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. You were showing how you're changing a little bit the frameworks from ecosystem services to nature's gifts to people, etc. But I was, in one of your last slides, your reports still refer to ecosystem services in the title. How do you demuddy the water then between these two conceptualizations?
Yeah, good question. I don't have a clear answer to. Honestly, I mean, even our title includes ecosystem services. We're not going to change our title. But this has been established in the context of more broader and very vivid debates and struggles over the concept of ecosystem services, which one part finds it, really the next way forward, coming from a very biocentristic view of conservation, etc. But the other one, and which I think there is a good argument to make for that, and the other one find that very threatening, because that's throwing out so much thing if we were to focus only on market-based evaluation. And so the creation of IPBES and its work program was accompanied with quite a strong struggle over this concept. And the discussion and our methodological approach to nature's contributions to people, and how we try to bring a more inclusive approach to bear, has been born out of that type of discussion. So we don't invent it, we don't want to impose it. It's just one way of, in our frame, to encapsulate, to deal with that debate. And I think without throwing out ecosystem services is still there. We have just tried to show how, if one were to wish that, bring it in a more broader, holistic context of more diversity. So it's still sort of tagged underneath, but so we won't change the title. And also the titles of the deliverables and the assessments, they're pre-given by the decisions of the firm. That may look different next time when we have new projects.
We may have time for one last question. Unless any? Yes,
thank you for a very nice presentation. Are you satisfied of how IPBES is growing since the beginning, and what are the perspective in, say, a few years to come? You've mentioned some very hard work and difficult tasks to do. And what's your
Yeah, so there are two different, yes, in a nutshell, I am very satisfied. In 5 years, from 5 years ago, we were not much more than 26 pages of the establishing a resolution. Now we have already engaged 1,500 experts. We have leveraged research funding for 25 million is one case, or leveraged over 30 million of capacity building around the world. These kind of things. We have our first products, like the pollination assessment, which had impacts on the CBD having formulated a specific work program on pollination. You have a coalition of a willing number of countries got together to implement that within their national reach, etc. So there's a lot of things I think we have done and made. I happen to be in that situation that I also did my PhD on this before it was established in the debate. The debate was luckily long enough for me to finish a PhD, more than I would have expected. And the debate of establishing this was 7 years, so it's longer than we have actually existed already. From a scientific perspective of what a science policy interface could very idealistically achieve or should in a more complex world, there's still room for improvement. But 5 years is nothing in terms of building an institution.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, Thomas Koetz, for coming. Okay, we'll directly continue with our next presentation of Marina Kosmus. She's from GIZ, the Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit. Is there? German development
agency for international cooperation.
Sorry for us. She's the head of the value program that has been mentioned various times by Thomas Koetz, and she will present the ecosystem service perception of GIZ and this project.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today in this side event. I'm trying to bring a little bit the practitioner's perspective. We work with the GIZ. This is a project which is financed by the Federal Environmental Ministry. This is for environment, nature conservation, building and nuclear safety, and this is in the framework of the International Climate Initiative. So when we start to create values, we start to think about, it was about 5 years ago, and one of the main goal of this project was to try to bring the ecosystem service approach in the community of practice of the GIZ and to try to diversify the portfolio of projects. Until then, most of the projects working on biodiversity, there was one of the focus was protected areas, and after the different conference of the parties, as you know, we need to go beyond protected areas and try to integrate ecosystem service and biodiversity into the different landscape, but also in different sectors. So the concept of mainstreaming inside different sectors was one of the main goals of these projects. But first of all, why we are working on or with ecosystem services? Just is a very practical perspective. Even though the concept could be very difficult sometimes to try to communicate, when you really talk with people in different countries and independent countries and you start to talk about the benefit that nature gives to us, they understand what we are talking about. And if I say that I stay, for example, that today I wake up and then I make a cup of coffee and I take a shower and I ask which are the role of nature in all different these activities, then people try to identify all these connections that we have with nature in our daily life. So one of the things is that this is an explicit contribution of nature to our well-being. The other thing is that this connection with all the different sectors. For example, if we talk with the business sector, if we talk with the health sector, if we talk also with the urban sector, they all start to understand how all these links among nature and the main activities that are very important for such sectors. And you also can identify dependence and impacts of the activities on the different, on nature, and also the impact that we make on nature through these activities. So one of the things is that we work with ecosystem services because we think really that it helps us to try to make this connection and to try to address better the drivers of ecosystems degradation and biodiversity loss. And if we talk about the context, in the context of climate change, then we really believe that integrated ecosystem services in different in different activities, it helps us to improve and to increase resilience. It really makes a difference in the quality of the measures. If we think, for example, in a forestation project, if we think only on carbon sequestration and carbon storage, and then if you want to add and to think a little bit broad ahead and think about water regulation or habitat for species. So we really think that if you can contribute by bringing a little bit of more aspect to a more holistic perspective for sustainable development. We really think that this is important, and one way of considering that is through ecosystem service assessment. But this is only one way. Thomas was talking a lot about how ecosystems assessment could give us a little bit a better perspective and more information and bring in evidence and trying to measure different things to be able to manage them in a better way. We consider that ecosystem service assessment should be much more than academic exercise, and we are trying to build bridges among different communities. Therefore, when we work in different partner countries, one of the issues is that we don't start with the assessment, we start with the entry points. For example, which is important for the region, which is important for the local community, and what do they need on the policy level. And through that, we see how ecosystem service assessment could be addressed in a way that they will be considered in the next planning projects. In 2012, we brought an approach based on the corporate ecosystem valuation and the TIP approach on how to bring ecosystem services in development planning. And then we try to create this guideline to give some orientations in the different projects. And the guideline is very simple. First of all, you have to define that it's also not a recipe. We just try to give some orientation. How can you consider and identify and assess ecosystem services in a way that then they could be integrated in different planning processes, in management plans, for example, in development plans at the community level, etc. So one of the things, first of all, identifying the scope, defining the scope and setting the stage. Sometimes could be, for example, the development of a development plan in the community of municipality level. Sometimes could be the remake or the adaptation of the national plan for development, and then there will be trickled down all different development plans of the different sectors, etc. Then we see how can we use screen and prioritize different ecosystem services. After we prioritize ecosystem services on the base of dependence and impact from the economic activities and social activities of the place where we are working with, then we try to make some sort of assessment considering conditions and trends and trade-off, and that's in the step number 3 is where we also consider vulnerability assessments if there are if we have the data to use it, and then adapt the different measures that we are going to plan to try to reverse or to minimize the drivers of ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss. We have a 4th step, and this is appraising institutional and cultural frameworks, and this is very important because after we identify the different drivers of ecosystem degradation, then we see which are motivating the different actors to do the activities that they are doing the way they do it. So I'm sure that you're going to look a little bit more at social assessment in the next presentation. After we do that, and you have a really good analysis of the conditions of ecosystem services and the trends, and which are the drivers of ecosystem degradation, and how can we address such drivers, and to analyze the underlying causes. Then we see what can we make, which activities should be changed to be able to improve the situation at place. And that's the step number 5 on preparing better decision making. After we have this kind of sort of plan of actions, we see how the financial resources look like, and also the capacities of the different stakeholders at place, and then we try that this plan will be implemented in the different places. What are we looking when we try to make this sort of rapid analysis at place? First of all are the dependencies, in which ways the development process or the economic activities or the different sort of livelihoods rely on ecosystem quality and on the service provisions. Afterwards, we look at the impacts, the way in which development processes affect ecosystems quality and service provisions. We analyze the different threats or challenges that development processes or the economic or socio-economic activities or livelihood styles pose to ecosystems. And then we look at the opportunities. And according to that, then you are going to select several activities or promote or prioritize activities that they suppose to be more in a way of a sustainable, sound way. For example, first of all, you look at the dependencies according to the main activities, then you look at the impacts, then you look at the different risks. For example, if we have a problem of deforestation, then one of the risks is going to be that the business is going to be gone if you keep on doing it that way, and then you will have probably problems on soil degradation, and there will be a problem for the people living at place. And then you see which changes do you need to improve those activities and turn it into an opportunity. For example, through a sustainable forest management. For example, through promoting tourism in the area and trying to organize entry fees to the park. For example, considering the protection of watersheds areas, so that the quality and quantity of water could be guaranteed for the people living at place. And for example, considering different sort of varieties of crops to be able to support pollination. We are working since 2012 in more than 20 countries, applying the IES approach in one way or another one. Sometimes they are really very vast ecosystems assessments, and sometimes they are kind of more direct to a very specific point. For example, in Namibia, we were working to try to integrate ecosystem services in the strategy environment assessment for land use planning, and considering all the different trade-offs and the possibilities to reverse, to minimize the impacts on ecosystem degradation. In Ecuador, they want us to do an assessment on the mangroves to try to see how the national program to protect mangroves could be better implemented, considering the social dynamic and cultural patterns of the local communities. Or, for example, in Mexico, we were supporting the economic valuation of a protected area to try to show the contribution of the area to the economic development of the region. One a concrete example is in Brazil. Is somebody coming from Brazil here? Yeah. So how can you explain better Duque de Caixas? there will be? Duque, yeah. So I have to improve my Portuguese, so I'm sorry about that. But for example, when I talked at the beginning about look at the entry points. The entry point here, there was an adaptation project from the GIZ, working together with the Environmental Ministry. And we got the question, well, the municipality of Duque-de-Caixas, then they want to update the development plan of the municipality, considering ecosystem services to improve the adaptation capacity of the area. So this was an entry point for us. There was some interest of the people, of the decisions makers at place, and then they say, how can we identify and prioritize ecosystem services in a way they are going to help us to prioritize activities that helps to increase resilience at the area. So what they did is apply in a very participatory way, a very rapid way in the framework for different workshops to call different people coming from the different sectors at the area, and then to see which are the most important ecosystem services for them according to their priorities and needs, and then to see how was the land use at that place at that moment, and see where were some different conflicts regarding the biophysical characteristic of the area and then the different type of land uses. In the whole discussion among the different stakeholders, there was the highlight the importance of a forest landscape and the green spaces of the place, because they brought very much different ecosystem services like water regulation or shade, for example, microclimate regulation for the people living at place, or also because it helps to regulate the different floods coming from the seasonalities of the area. So the people just prioritize only 3 ecosystem services, because we try to keep them simple, and we start with water supply, regulation of quality of air, and flood control. And according to that, they prioritize also different type of activities that they could help them to try to keep these ecosystem services working in a better place. And they show in an exercise of participatory mapping the different places of native vegetation and the areas and the different type of land uses. This is one of the maps that they are discussing right now at place, and trying to see how the new development plan of the municipality could assess the priority areas to try to conserve or restore over there, to be able to keep on these ecosystems at place working in a most effective way. Then another issue that we address also, we help project at place to try to adapt the ecosystem service approach in the different planning processes, but we also work, like Thomas said, on a platform, on a web page where people from different countries can go into there and look for different sort of methods and information on ecosystem services. So we have this web page. I invite you to visit that web page, where you can see in a way of a navigator more than 60 methods, that there is a description of these methods, how can you use it. There are like biophysical methods, there are socioeconomical methods, cultural methods that you can use to do different sort of ecosystem service assessments. And you also have some experience where ecosystem services took place in a way that they have some policy update at the end of the assessment. The web page and the values navigators is online since 2014. There is an overview of more than 60 methods, models, and instruments. There are also, it was a really interesting exercise to see how can we, from the people coming from outside to the web page, how can you give some orientations to be able to land in the methods that you really needed. For example, and not to read the 60 or 68 methods description, but to see according to the policy area where you are working, the type of assessments that you would like to run or you are planning to run, and to see the type of ecosystem services that you would like to assess. Then there are like a navigator where you can really select from these 70, 60 methods the best one for your assessment. And there are also some recommendations to design and run ecosystem service assessment and cases where you can see where did it work in a good way, giving you also the information from resource institutions and persons that can help you to do the assessment the way you need, and also to integrate these ecosystem services in the different planning processes. And we also have the link with IPBES, like Thomas said before, because we really would like to create this network of networks. This is a little bit how the navigator works. First of all, you go, I mean, there are many things on the web page. You go to the methods navigators, and then you try to follow this place when you don't want to have the whole database, and then choose the policy area, regarding what would you like to do, or where would you like to do in the assessment. Would you like to go for policy options? Would you like to mobilize financial resources for your projected areas? Would you like to address infrastructure projects, or are you working in agriculture, etc.? So you have different kind of policy areas. After that, you go to identify the purpose of your assessment, and then to find the case studies to try to see how other people did it and learn from other people, and then you go to the different methods and you get an overview from that. So I invite you to join that and to navigate in the world of ecosystem services. We also create... Okay. Yeah. We also did different kind of training packages that we also run with the different bilateral projects all over the world, and we created a community of practice with more than 3,000 people, working and trained on the ecosystem services. And this is how, this is how the projects work, and where IPBES also played a role with us. One is in ecosystem service assessment, in trainings, working on capacity building, then on the inventory of methods, on the training packages, supporting the training, the technical support units of capacity building, and also with the exchange of experience and lessons learned at international level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marina, Kosmus, for this nice and interesting presentation. We are running a little bit short in time, therefore I would like to directly or postpone questions to the last part of the session, or even the lunch we have afterwards, and continue now directly. Thank you very much again. Directly with Professor Souleymane Konate from Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast. He's the head of the research unit on ecology and biodiversity at the University of Nangui, and has many other positions and functions as well. But yeah, I'd rather listen to him than telling all these things, and he will say something about ecosystems. This is to go up to the next slide. Okay. Ecosystem services from a Ivorian perspective. The pointer is maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Henning. So, as introduced, I'm Souleymane Konate from the University of Nangui. First, let me apologize because I'm currently speaking French, and my English not so good, so please excuse me for listening. So I quickly would like to give a sort of case studies on ecosystem services used for sustainable development in West Africa, and especially what is the case in Côte d'Ivoire. So briefly, I will talk first about the biodiversity in West Africa and the link with deforestation and climate change. And secondly, I will try to tell you a bit about how ecosystem services approach is taking into account now in the national strategy for biodiversity conservation in order to mitigate all the threats that we will see at the beginning. And at the end, I will tell you a bit about a project called WARES on science policy interface in West Africa. So briefly, when we talk about West Africa, we all know that tropical ecosystems are very important because they are housing more than half of biodiversity in less than 10% of the surface. But West Africa is about 6 million square kilometers with 300 million of population. And they are also very important ecosystem and biodiversity content, going from the very dry Sahelian region to a really tropical moist forest. And it belongs also to the outpost of biodiversity. As you can see here, the Upper Guinea region here. The Upper Guinea region here is one of these hotspots of biodiversity, but unfortunately there is only less than 15% of the original biodiversity of the region are still existing. So this is just the situation, the global situation. And when we look more closely, we realize that there are a lot of threats on the biodiversity of this region, but globally, from the independence days, meaning about 60 years, the last 60 years, we lose more than 75% of the forest, the primary forest has disappeared. Especially in Côte d'Ivoire, we are close to 90% of the forests have been lost during the during the quarter of century, with a rate of disappearance which is very high, close to 8% of the surface losing every year. And there are a lot of threats, like deforestation is one of the key threats, but the new threat, which is increasing threat, is also climate change. This is also something very important, and political crises also, of course, are impacting biodiversity in the region. And when we look at the case of Côte d'Ivoire, the links between deforestation, agriculture, and climate change, this was in the 60s, the half of the country was completely covered by a true primary forest. But when you look at how this move, you can clearly see that the only remaining forest is in the southern part of the country, the true primary forest. And when we make a correlation with the climate change, the data show clearly that at the beginning of the 60s, the country was completely rainfall. We don't have any place in the country with less than 1,000 millimeters of rainfall per year. But we can clearly make a correlation of the evolution of rainfall pattern due to this deforestation. And at the end, a report clearly shows a strong correlation with the increase of the cover of cocoa plantation, with also the decrease of the area, and with the increase also of the reduction of the rainfall pattern. So there is a clear correlation between the deforestation due to agricultural system and also the climate change. And this is very important because this is something which has been stated by a report clearly stating that Côte d'Ivoire has a very important biodiversity, and but due to deforestation, poaching, and destruction of natural habitat, in particular the cocoa farming, has played a significant role in altering natural landscape that are important of maintaining biodiversity. High population growth also and use of fertilizer, all these are threatening completely the human life. So the consistent approach to our point of view is a sort of new paradigm on biodiversity conservation. It's not a question to just only conserving a particular species of or a particular ecosystem like we used to do, saying we protect elephant because it's a charismatic species, or we protect a forest because it's a sacred forest. But now it's a question, the ecosystem service approach is more question of conserving this area because of the role of this species and because of the role of this ecosystem and because of the link with human well-being and socioeconomic development. So when you make these links, the politician and all the people who can make the decision can better understand that their business, their life is linked to this biodiversity and ecosystem services, but not to a particular species. And as stated by the Building Ecosystem Assessment, it's about the benefits people obtain from the ecosystem, and not only because of the presence of a species, which is also important. So this new change in paradigm helps us to really change the thing a bit in the region. We have several case studies, but I just want to talk about two case studies of the use of ecosystem services to make this change. A PhD student of a project called Wascal has been done in West Africa, and Genscherallee showed clearly the impact of the pollinators of bees on agricultural system, especially in cotton, sesame, and also in cashew. The key results show clearly that the quantity of the fiber of the cotton and the grain of cotton and the germination potential completely change when you compare, the non-pollinated flower with auto-pollination and with the pollination with the bees. This is very important for the farmers because germination issue is completely linked to climate change. Because you don't have strong seed that can germinate, with the change of the climate, it has a big impact. So he wrote a policy briefing out of this PhD just to clearly say that having bees, especially wild bees, will completely impact the adaptation of the population to climate change and the income. And lately also we have the two major evaluations of the economic evaluation of ecosystem services of two main protected areas, which are our World Heritage, the tiny natural primary forest, which is one of the last remaining Pleistocene refugia forests in the region, and the Komodo National Park, which is the savannas. And the results clearly indicate that the rainfalls, as well as the productivity, agricultural productivity, are completely linked to the presence of this forest, as well as the sequestration of carbon capacity, and also the human living around the forest and even far from the forest are completely depending on this area. So these are two points. Now let us see what policy are used in order to implement this. I'm sorry, the slide is still in French, but clearly there are several strategies which are used by the country after all this demonstration, after all this problem, to try to mitigate and to go to a more sustainable development way. One of these things is a sort of law on sustainable development, and a national strategy of climate change also linked to the national strategy on biodiversity, and especially they were looking to build a regional carbon market in the region also, thanks to the importance of these protected areas. And also we lately create a national commission on sustainable development goals, aiming at integrating the sustainable development, the UN sustainable development goal in all the sectoral activities in the country. And this is really very important. And there are two main legal documents which are completely oriented with the development of the country. The first one is the National Plan of Development, which is a quinquennial plan. And this plan aims at transforming the country from an agricultural country to industrial country. And the second document, which is our commitment to our ENDC commitment. And these two documents, unfortunately, are not very compatible. They are completely opposite, because in one way the country wants to become independent to natural resources, meaning developing industries which will pollute more, which create more impact on carbon sequestration, and in another way, we'd like to also fulfill our commitment toward the reduction of CO2. So what to do? And these questions have been asked to the research and universities, where we are trying to conciliate these two apparent opposite situations. And this has been done through a national program on environments. Funded 3 billion is a lot for my country. And these are focusing in 3 main domains. The first domain is about biodiversity conservation and ecosystem management. The objective is to better know the biodiversity and ecosystem services in terms of quantification and also in terms of economic values, and to produce sustainable tools for management. And the second is about the urban ecology, which is really important because we had very fast growth countries. Half of the population are living now in the cities, and as you know, the population growth in Africa is one of the fastest. And it's important to preserve natural and cultural values in the cities so that we can keep some ecosystem services. The last one is about water issues, which is also something very important. And all these are really important in order to really integrate them. Now let me tell you about another issue, another program which is IPBES, because the key question in this question is the disconnection between the research product and the implementation of the politics. We had a lot of information about the problem like deforestation, like pollution, but none of them are translated in policy. And also there are a lot of policy problems which are not in the agenda of the research. So how to make these two connected? This is the aim of this project, IPBES project, which is about supporting West African contribution to the IPBES. And this project originated also from one key question is that we just talked about the assessment of IPBES, but there is very few contribution from West Africa, not because we don't have important biodiversity or because we don't have human resources. It's simply a question of I think, a capacity building. So this project is implemented by several actors that you can see here, and there are four key components of the project, and one of the important components is a sort of network of experts and meeting of experts on biodiversity and ecosystem services in the region. And the first meeting will be organized in Abidjan at the end of this month. And another component is also the master program on science policy interface for biodiversity and ecosystem services, which will be launched during at the end of the year, and where we already organized the selection of the different candidates. It's a 2-year program, master program, with 15 students from the 15 countries of ECOS. We just made the selection, and the good news is that we success to have 50% of gender issue. So we have 8 female and 7 male. This is something we are really proud of this because it's very rare and it's important also. And people are coming from different countries, and we even have some external candidates. And the goal is really to have this conclude completely, to make the connection between the research activities and the policy implementation. And this is something which is, I think, important. And well, yes, this is more or less all. Thank you, and I'm open for the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Souleymane Konate. Again, I would like to postpone the discussion and question to the end, or we will have a lunch snack afterwards, and we may approach the presenters there and ask them, because we're running late. We come to the next presenter. This is Dr. Girma Kelboro from ZEF. He's a social scientist, and he would like to add a social science perspective on the discussion on ecosystem services, which so far is major and primarily in the domain of natural scientists.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I appreciate Henning for his efforts to bring me in to this forum. I'll try to talk about social perspective and try to be very brief, so please be attentive. Because if you miss anything, then it's lost forever. So, I try to introduce the idea and then try to indicate some concepts and move on with the experience in Ethiopia shortly, and then the impact that people could see from their own way of understanding on the impact of ecosystem changes. And then I will try to suggest some analytical approach. Of course, that was captured very well by the first presenter from IPBES, and make conclusive remarks. Okay, when we talk about ecosystems, we can say that generally they are the basis for survival. They are not beginning, as I said, but it's the basis for survival, and interaction of different components is important. This comes from my own forestry knowledge. Don't think that I'm just reading and bringing it from someone else, but my own background before I come to the social science, become a social scientist. And then people are influential part of the system. They are the key. And in many developing countries, the connection between people and nature is a very strong one, and even it is a matter of survival in Africa. So if I talk about the national level, Ethiopia, I think doesn't differ that much from the presentation made by Professor about Côte d'Ivoire. Like the situation, crops may vary, but major factors, driving factors, the impact on the livelihood and the dependence of people on nature, and the impact of population on the whole thing is more or less similar. So I don't go into those details. So we need to have a comprehensive understanding of ecosystems in the context of nature, culture continuum. I mean, the separation between nature as a kind of separate entity from culture and people cannot work, doesn't help. So I'll try to put my presentation in that context and try to share stories from Ethiopia. Okay, briefly on the concepts. When we talk about social perspectives and ecosystem services, we are referring mostly to the services brought down to the level of benefits for the people. And the first thing that we consider in benefits is kind of therapeutic. I took this one from a review made by Schmidt on more than 100 articles, and the summary shows that therapeutic service benefit is one, which includes medicine, clean water, and so on. You can see river with people as an example from Ethiopia. And other is heritage, which refers to personal or collective history and cultural identity. If you go to a farmer in Ethiopia and ask him or her about her history or his history, they immediately relate that to their land. We belong to the land, and the land belongs to us. So moving these people out means losing history, attachment to the whole system. So it's a critical factor. And we also have economic one, that's very obvious, including work, income, and so on, and amenity, that includes cognitive development, artistic, aesthetic values, and educational benefits. And of course, spiritual, religious value, symbols and elements with sacred and religious significance. Trees sometimes are very important, and some hill areas have special attachments, spiritual attachments, and existence. Sometimes, or also in many cases, where there is nature and people living together, they value the existence of nature itself, and they are proud of that. And it's not like we think as experts, conservation experts. It's really people also have their own value and attachment and a strong feeling of confidence and some kind of really satisfaction when biodiversity is conserved. And they think about also the option, because they have to use the resource now. And also they look at big quest, which is looking into the future use of the area by the next generation. So all these are included in the social consideration when we talk about ecosystem services. When we move on to the Ethiopian experience, okay, in Ethiopia, conservation is more or less exclusionary. I mean, people are not considered as conservationists, so experts think that people have less knowledge, so they have to control everything, so people are excluded. And these are some consequences. One important consequence that I have observed myself when I carried a deep study in the National Park in southern Ethiopia was that there is disagreement on the reason for existence of conserved ecosystems. You can see that in the data that about 82%, more than 80% of the people think that this area is conserved to fulfill the government's interest, not their interest. So I don't have to go into other data because it's self-explanatory. And the other consequence has been loss of social value for a conserved area. For example, again, in that national park that I studied, people think that about 88% of the people think that there is no benefit from this area. People are using the resource, but as a national park, in the concept of national park, they don't see any benefit as a national park as an institution. So this kind of approach where people are excluded is leading to loss of value for ecosystem from the people's perspective. And the other consequence that I have observed again is layers of ecosystem management or use arrangements. From the perspective of government authorities or conservation authorities supported by international conservation bodies, is that this is a national park reserved for biodiversity conservation. So every area, the whole area of the park is protected, and utilization-oriented use or direct taking of resources from this area is not allowed. But people have their own land uses. You can see wood gathering area in the park, in the map. We made this map. Fishing area, grazing area, farmlands, even the national park. So because there is disagreement between the people and the conservation authorities. And people are not sure about the future of this area, so they have to use it now. This is another crucial consequence. So I continue to impact as perceived by the people of ecosystem change. Still, even if they are using it in their own ways, they again see the consequence of improper utilization. They were telling me that there has been rainfall pattern change, concentration of rainfall to a very small part of the year, temperature increase. I didn't go into analyzing whether this is because of climate change or not. That's why I just put question mark. This the input obtained from people's perception. And also change in river systems have been observed by the people. For example, a famous river that you can see there is in the national park, a river known as Sommer. It was a perennial river, but people could see that for more than 40 years, 50 years time, it has been changed into a seasonal river. Of course, ecosystem changes in other areas have contributed to that, but also other factors, including climate change and improper use, have contributed to that. And people also could see change in water size and also a dying of lakes. For example, I could also experience days of one lake known as Haramaya in eastern Ethiopia. This is located near a university known as Haramaya University. I did my first degree there in forestry, and when I finished my studies in 1996, the lake was there. It was a very, very beautiful lake, providing water supply to a very historical city known as Harar in eastern Ethiopia. But after 8 years, the lake disappeared. It still couldn't be recovered, and then that is one of the disasters people could see. Okay, let me go to the suggestion of analytical approach. It starts with my assumption, and which is, I think we all agree that nature as a provider of service and people as dependence is not a helpful approach. So we build on the basic reality that people and nature exist in continuum. Interactions and dependence on one another is there. Therefore, this is a framework which is more or less similar to the one presented by IPBES. So I think I don't have to go into details. The basic idea is that we have to look into the social ecological systems analysis framework, whereby we look at the social dimension, the ecological dimension, the interaction and the governance, and the flow that connects all of them together in a very continuous flow. This helps us to understand in a holistic way how the system functions and the services can continuously be available for the people, and also people can be there also to manage ecosystems in a better way. So, to conclude, understanding continuity flows between natural and social systems helps to develop and contextualize ecosystem management approaches in addressing impacts of climate change, and managing ecosystems in consideration to the social dimension through inclusive or participatory approaches enable improvement of the services and helps also in addressing consequences of climate change. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, please. All of these have contributed to the success of my work.
Thank you very much, Girma. Yes. Yeah, as the time has proceeded, we decided to skip the last presentation from Dr. Biber-Freudenberger on the TEEP approach, the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services from an economic perspective. But if you are interested in learning from that, she will also be here in the next 30 minutes. I would like to ask the audience if there's anything you really want to ask the three presenters in a very short statement. We can accept this. Otherwise, I would really like to encourage you to approach all the speakers and also Dr. Biber-Freudenberger during the lunch. Lunch is served outside. Please help yourself. You're invited. And again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. This session series continues for this week. There will be other sessions on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Same time, same place. Please come. Feel invited. Thank you very much.